Welcome to Wholesaling Lease Options Marketing Mastermind. On today's session, we're going to answer a question from one of our subscribers about what to do when a seller wants a security deposit. And we'll also talk about what is a reasonable option deposit and making sure that you're Dodd-Frank compliant. Enjoy the show.
Good morning. This is Steve Kletch here with Talking to Sellers Live. We're going to be making some phone calls, talking to some sellers looking for wholesale deals and looking for wholesale lease option deals. Before we get started on the call today, if you guys didn't check out yesterday's session, check it out. We got a couple leads on the phone, but we also had the awesome Bill Rafter on, so we got to catch up a little bit at the end of the session. Bill's on today too, and we're going to bring him on in a little bit. Before we get started with the calls, I did have a question come in from my buddy Noah up in the Seattle market. He's working on a $20,000 lease option deal, and he's the way this deal's working is that he's giving $5,000 of that to the seller. So he's going to end up making $15,000, right? So I don't know the purchase price of the property, which is pretty relevant, but I'm working on the assumption that it's a fair number as far as the $20,000, right? So let me do this. I'm going to bring on Kyle, who handles all of our deals locally here and structures our lease options. So I'm going to have Kyle explain the way that we do it, and then we'll have Bill come on and give some tips for lease options as well. Just give you guys a little background info. This is the way that Noah's got his structured right now. Okay. So the way his is worded, it says, in exchange for $5,000 and other good and valuable consideration, landlord-seller gives the optionee the option to enter into a lease purchase agreement with the landlord-seller with the above-mentioned property, and the option may be assigned to a third party, right, subject to written approval. If this agreement is assigned, optionee may collect an assignment fee up to $20,000 from the third party, approved by the landlord-seller. That means I'm giving the seller, so this is his question. That means I'm giving the seller $5K and keep the $15K, right? So he just wants to make sure he's doing it right. I do want to make sure you guys understand that nobody's going to talk on the session today is a lawyer, so it's always best practice to check with a local attorney who knows the local real estate. But we will comment and kind of let you guys know what we're doing in our business. So let me bring on Kyle Johns here, and he'll walk you through the agreement that we use and the wording that we use in order to give money to the seller. If it's a $3,000 option fee, that's usually, we just don't do that, right? Normally when we structure a lease option, the seller isn't getting a part of the option deposit or a security deposit. However, if you're dealing with a large amount, like a $20,000 option fee, it's not a big deal to cut the seller into that, and especially if it's going to preserve the deal. Kyle, go ahead and come up. I'll pop these in, and then this is the screen you can see right here.
All right, what's going on, guys? Yeah, so basically, as Steve was saying, whenever we run this in our own market, most deals are not $20,000 option fees, but being in this situation, giving $5,000 to the seller is perfectly fine here. You just have to figure out a way that they feel comfortable to even relay that information over to them when setting up the deal. Looking at the language, again, I'm not a lawyer, but looking at the language in from what Noah sent over, it looks like it is, everything looks good there. You would want to consult with, if you're doing the deal in Seattle, consult with some lawyers in Seattle about that if you have serious questions or, you want to get that officially answered. The way we do it here is usually we have a lot of people on the phone, and so by the time the deals reach me and it's in the stage of whether that's getting negotiated or not, the seller usually just says, hey, I want a security deposit, or I was expecting to get this. And whether it was $3,000 or $10,000 or whatever the option fee is, then we usually just agree on it and make sure they get taken care of, do some good business that way. I don't suggest doing it that way, but that is one way to handle it when you're working with your sellers. Don't let an objection like that stop you. You can go ahead and just move it forward. As far as the official language, the way that it's written up, if you see number 4 and number 5, both of these are never included in the same agreement. I put these in there this morning. Number 4 is what we usually go for, because you can see the way that it's stated in his agreement, he is getting the option. He's actually saying the option, he's paying the seller a $5,000 option to charge the tenant buyer a $20,000 option fee or assignment fee. The way we have it written up is we're still doing the $1 option consideration, because we usually agree to give the seller a security deposit. So basically, buyer tenant, which is us, and if you know this, you have to go through this agreement, but when we sign this with the seller, the seller signs here at the bottom as the seller landlord, and we sign as the buyer tenant. And so that'll help you understand this language here. But basically, the security deposit, the buyer tenant, which is us, agreed to pay the seller landlord 1 month's rent as security deposit. This deposit is refundable when the property is purchased. So basically, once the property is purchased, they can cut that check back to us when we pay that security deposit. Again, guys, we don't deal with this a lot. This is one of those things for me. It's just an objection that comes up, and I'm not going to let it kill a deal, no matter if it's a $3,000 deal or not. If the seller requests 1 month, if they request $1,000, then we'll make $2,000. We'll walk away and be happy. If it's in the form of an assignment fee, again, I'm not a lawyer. This is quick language I typed up, and this is usually how we handle it with the sellers. We just want to make sure that it's clear, that they feel comfortable, and they understand that they're going to get what they want through the agreement. So buyer tenant agrees to pay the seller landlord $5,000 of the assignment. This payment is non-refundable under all circumstances and shall be deducted from the total assignment collected by Resource Real Estate Holdings. So in this agreement, the sellers understand that we have the option to assign this. They should be under that understanding. And when you're negotiating that with them, as long as they know that and you have stated in the agreement that you are completely, it's upfront and you're okay with paying them $5,000 of the $20,000, add the language in, consult with an attorney if you feel the need to, and move the deal forward. And that's it.
Cool. Thanks, Kyle. So before I bring Bill on to get his opinion, which is always super valuable, I can definitely know from the way that I talk to sellers, and you guys see the way that I do it. I mean, I do not talk about security deposit on the initial call, and it usually doesn't, if it does come up, I usually handle the objection by talking, about the quality of the tenant buyers, and how they're not going to, mess up the house, how they're responsible for the day-to-day maintenance. So that's one of the way I'll try and get past that on the phone. But I'm sure Kyle has had plenty of lease options on his table that I've sent him where I didn't talk about security deposit with the seller, and then it comes up later and he has to deal with it, Yeah. So Bill, I'm going to unmute you now. I'm curious to see what you have, what your opinion is. Can you hear me, Bill?
Hey, how you doing, Steve and Kyle?
Good, man. You're loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was listening in. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Again, it really depends on the laws of the state. For instance, in our state, you really have to do a separate lease and a separate option, a full-blown agreement. And the reason is, unless you're licensed, if you don't do it that way, it appears that you're operating as a realtor without a license, and the real estate commission will come down on you like a sack of bricks. So what we do is we actually lease the property from the seller with a right to buy, called, the option to purchase, 2 separate agreements. And then, we actually lease the property with the agreement that we don't have to make payments for the first 90 days, and we get a 90-day out. And then we proceed, to go ahead with the right of assignment for both agreements, built within the agreement. It specifies that, we have a right to assign it to the third party with the seller's approval, and then we put in there, the option fee and all that type of thing, and on what we're going to do. Now, that's when the seller usually steps up to the plate and says, well, there's no security deposit in here, I want one, or I want part of the option fee. So generally, it's at that point that you start negotiating with the seller, and there's two ways that we do it here. One way is to give the seller a normal security deposit, which is usually equivalent to a month's rent. Or secondly, instead of giving them a security deposit, which is refundable, we give them a portion of our non-refundable option fee or assignment fee, which is non-refundable, which means that in the event that in the future that the tenant buyer doesn't perform, then the seller gets to keep their portion of that assignment or option fee, and they don't have to refund it back to the tenant buyer. Because it's an option fee, it's not a security deposit. If it's a security deposit, even though the people didn't buy the property, they still have a lease with that, landlord, and if they leave the property, in good shape and clean, then that landlord has to refund that security deposit back to them. So that's the reason why we typically make it an option fee rather than a security deposit. But there's certain, landlords and investors in town that I do business with, they want a security deposit. I mean, these are people I've done business with over and over again. And they specifically want a security deposit as part of the deal. So the way I do that is if I get a $5,000 option fee and the rent's $700 a month, when we finalize the deal, I take $700 out of my option fee and classify that as a security deposit, and it goes to them. That's part of our deal. And so as far as the guy in Washington State, first of all, as we discussed a little bit earlier, it's really important that the option fee that you collect is reasonable in your state. Reasonable is generally means about 3.5% of whatever the option price is, which is what FHA requires as a down payment.
Right.
I mean, if you're in a $100,000 property, that'd be about $3,500. If you're in the state of Washington and it's a $400,000 property, then that would be about $14,000. So that would be what I would deem reasonable, about 3.5% of whatever the option price is. When you start getting up above that as a non-refundable option fee, it starts to look like a sale. And so even though you might call it a lease option, if it looks like a sale, the IRS may very well deem it to be a sale and classify it as a sale and not as a lease option.
And so it looks like a sale and smells like a sale, huh?
Yeah. If it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck.
Yeah.
You can call it a goose all day, but it's a duck.
Yeah.
And the thing is what happens if that happens to you is now the Dodd-Frank law kicks into place. See, a whole bunch of different sets of laws, because if it's deemed to be a sale, then what you've done is owner financing. And in reference to the Dodd-Frank law, if you're doing owner financing, there's a whole bunch of new sets of laws that you have to follow if you do any kind of owner financing with an owner-occupant. So anyway, so that's what I'd recommend that folks take a look at. So getting back to this deal at hand, where the guy's getting $20,000 and giving $5,000 to the seller, again, depending on the laws there, the way I would do it is I'd have a lease and an option, two separate agreements. I would put in there that the option fee is going to be, $20,000, of which $5,000 is going to go to the seller, and $15,000 would be going to my company.
Right. Okay. Awesome. What do you I mean, this is really kind of not an early objection, like you and Kyle both mentioned. It kind of happens later, once the contract's been approved. How do you usually handle that when the seller starts asking about security deposit? Do you kind of try and overcome the objection in some other ways, or do you typically just say, yeah, no problem, we'll give you a security deposit or option, whichever one they want?
Well, the first thing I ask is, and typically that doesn't, it comes up more if you're dealing with more sophisticated people. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody that's an investor that already owns rental properties, you're probably not going to be able to overcome that objection. They're going to want a security deposit because that's their mindset, and it's probably going to be a difficult objection to overcome. But here's what you would say. You would say, well, if we were dealing with a normal landlord-tenant situation here, I totally agree with you that a security deposit would be in order. However, we're not dealing with your normal tenant. We're dealing with a different class of person or people. We're dealing with somebody that wants to buy the house. They have a buyer's mentality, and they realize that this is probably their only opportunity to purchase a home. So they're putting up a significant amount of money in the form of an option fee. In this case, let's say $5,000. And so they're putting up $5,000 for the right to buy the property over the next, let's say, 35 months. And they're going to be responsible for the normal everyday maintenance and upkeep. And they're going to be making an investment in the form of sweat and labor in the house, upkeep, and an option fee up front. Plus, they're obligated to make their payments timely and, in accordance with the agreements. And if they don't do any of that, they lose their option deposit and they lose the right to buy the house. And so that's a significant loss for these folks. So the likelihood is, because they deem this property to be theirs, this is their home, not just a rental property, they're going to take a lot better care of it, and the likelihood is they're not going to do any damage to the property other than normal wear and tear. So if for some reason things don't work out, they will leave the property, at least broom clean when they move out. And so that's the way we handle our lease option agreements. If the seller or the landlord still objects, and they insist on getting a security deposit or a piece of the option fee, then you've got to make a decision. Is it worth $700 for a security deposit to make $4,300 net? And if you don't think it is, walk away from the deal. But to me, I'll pay $700 all day to walk away with $4,300 cash.
Right.
So that's the way you got to look at it. Is you give them the normal spiel about why these people are eminently qualified and security deposit is not required. But in the event that they insist on it and they won't do the deal with you without one, then you've got to make a decision. And logically, if there's enough money on the table, it'd be foolish, not to give them $700 to make $4,300.
Yeah, it's still a good deal. Everybody's winning. You're making enough on the option deposit still. Totally agree.
I mean, and you could go even a step further. And the likelihood that this is going to happen is pretty remote. I'll admit that, certainly. You could put language in there that stated that in the event that the folks buy the property and close on the transaction, that when the sale is closed, the $700 comes that you put up as a security deposit would be refunded back to you rather than a tenant buyer. So I mean, that's always a possibility to do it that way. But again, that's pretty remote that that's going to happen. Even if they buy the property, good luck trying to get the money back from the seller, 3 years from now.
Yeah.
But if it makes you feel better, you could always put that kind of language in there.
Excellent. Okay, so I kind of wrap up. I mean, the exact language we use in the contract, we've kind of seen 3 different ones, right? Like what you said, Bill, is what you use in yours. We use something a little different. And then, our guy in Washington's got some different language. I mean, to know exactly, that's something you really need to consult with a local real estate attorney in your market, to find out the exact thing. But obviously, we've gotten by with some addendums that we've done on our own. But one of the big issue that you brought up as well is making sure that the amount of the option fee is reasonable. And then that seems to be a bigger deal if you're violating that, right, Bill?
Yeah, and also, it's just, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to know what the local landlord-tenant laws are in your state, or in some cases in your county, because in some states the landlord-tenant laws are different from county to county. So it's really imperative that you look up and get a copy of the landlord-tenant laws for your state and you know, for your county. For instance, in Texas and in North Carolina, there's very specific laws on exactly what you can and cannot do in regards to lease options. You know, it's written in the statute. I mean, like in North Carolina, you have to give the people a 72-hour a 72-hour right of rescission. When you execute a lease option in the statute, you know, in the law in North Carolina, you have to give the tenant buyer 3 days to cancel the deal if they so choose, just like on a refinance. So they have 3 days to cancel the deal. So, you know, you kind of have to, you sign all the paperwork and then you wait 3 days and see if they're still in the game. And if they are, then you can legally move forward. And you have to put that exact language in your agreements. And if you don't, I mean, there's all kinds of fines and everything else. It's, you know, it's 100 miles of bad road if you don't do that stuff, because the law is very specific. It tells you exactly what to do step by step.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, like
in Texas, you know, you can only do lease options, my understanding is for 6 months, and then you have to convert it into a sale after that.
Right. Yeah. So like somebody like me, I mean, you know, I usually don't spend a lot of my time looking over contracts and stuff. I kind of prefer to, you know, make the calls, and then I work with somebody locally who knows, you know, this kind of stuff, right? Consult with you, deal with Kyle. If I'm by myself in a market, or let's say I'm going into a virtual market, where's the place that I want to go to check this information? Can I check with the title company? Do I need to find a local real estate attorney? Like, who's the guy that I can go to or find, you know, to make sure I'm doing things properly?
Well, when we started doing business in North Carolina, one of the first things we did is just Google landlord-tenant laws for the state of North Carolina.
Yeah.
You know, and we pulled that up, and as soon as we pulled that up, you know, this law popped up. And then there was articles written by attorneys about it. And so we realized that this is really unique, different from any other state. So then the next thing we did is we checked around with, you know, started calling for rent ads and talked to investors. And when we talked to the investors, we asked them which real estate attorney they recommended in the area. And, you know, after talking to half a dozen people, we got the same name kept coming up, and that's who we ended up calling, and contracted with a local attorney to draw up the agreements pursuant to the law. So we had an agreement pending, and we went ahead and had the attorney draw all the agreements and go through the whole process, including having the tenant buyer and the seller or the landlord meet at the attorney's office to sign the final papers. So we got the whole process, and we understood exactly what we needed to do and how we needed to do it, and then we knew how to proceed from that point forward. So again, you need to know what the landlord-tenant laws are, what you can and can't do in regards to leasing. You need to, you know, get an opinion on what the real estate laws are in reference to doing lease options, and whether or not what you need to do to keep out of the problems of acting as a realtor without a license. And then finally, you need to have a local attorney draw up your agreements, at least initially, and know that your agreements comply with the law. And then whether or not you want to use an attorney from that point forward is up to you, but at least at that point, you have an agreement that you paid for. And it's not, you know, and we got the agreement drawn up for about $700. So it wasn't $1 million to have that done. But man, it was sure talking about sleeping at night, you know, like a baby, when you knew that you were in full compliance with the law and you weren't going to have any issues with tenant buyers or attorneys later on coming back and saying that you're not in compliance with the local laws.
Definitely. So, I mean, it sounds like no excuses, right? I mean, at minimum, you know, even if you got no marketing budget or funds, you know, you should be Googling the tenant landlord laws in your local market, and then checking in the RIA, talking to other wholesalers, close a deal, go get your paperwork handled by an attorney, right?
Yeah, just make sure you're in compliance and you know where the line is, and you don't cross it in reference to violating lease option or landlord-tenant laws or violating real estate license laws, so that you're not operating as a realtor without license. I mean, you might be fine if you're only doing a couple of 3 deals a year, but I can promise you this. Here's what happens. I've seen this happen in almost every market. As soon as you start doing a lot of deals and making a lot of noise, and then you got signs in town and you got ads in the newspaper and you're doing deals, the real estate people are going to get mad because they think you're taking business away from them, and it's no skin off of their nose to turn you into the real estate commission because they think that you're operating as a realtor without a license. And it doesn't cost them any money to do this, and there's no downside for them. And so the next thing is some investigator from the Department of Commerce or the Real Estate Commission, whatever it's called in your state, is talking to you about how you're doing business, and asking you for copies of your agreements and all that kind of stuff to find out whether or not, you're operating as a licensee without license. So, it's really important that you spend a little extra time on the front end to make sure you're in compliance with everything, and it'll save you a ton of grief on the back end. Because if you got to go defend yourself in court, it could wipe out your profits for the next 2 years. So it just makes sense. I mean, just make sure you're in compliance with the local laws. It takes you a little time and money to do that up front, but once you know you're in good shape and what you need to do and how you need to do it, then you can ramp the thing up to full bore and go for it. Back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. So I'm going to go ahead and mute you here. Thank you so much for your input. So let's make a few calls here, and then we'll wrap up the session. I got about 5 calls lined up. See if we can get our own lease option going here. Let's see. Let me get back up here. So if you guys want to ask a question, we'd love getting questions, because it's something to talk about, and it's always fun helping somebody move their business forward. As you guys know, if you guys comment on any of the YouTube videos or in the commission-only virtual assistant Facebook group, you guys post your questions in the Facebook group or on the YouTube videos. I'll read them. We'll handle it on the session, and even if you can't jump on the live session, you can catch the replay and see, what we said about the question. Okay, I will post a link to the Facebook group in the bottom of the video, so you guys can get in there if you're not already in there. But let's go ahead and let me look at a couple leads here and see what we can do.